Professor Mohanty, I'll continue with you. If we could now look at trade ties between India and Russia. Now, this has been described as the weakest pillar in our relationship. Bilateral trade has struggled to cross the $10 billion mark. Where do you think we are lagging, and what are the areas where we can pick up bilateral trade?
This is true actually. In otherwise a vibrant strategic partnership, trade and investment is the weakest link in our relations. There is no doubt. See, our trade with China is almost $70 billion, and with Russia it is barely $11 billion. So this is really a very weak pillar of our strategic partnership, but there is a lot of potential. See, both countries have $2.5 billion economies, and compared to the size of the economy, this trade is just peanut. But there is a lot of potential for that. See, but I think there is an information gap. 80% of Indian exports to Russia consists of traditional goods, tea, coffee, garments, shoes, like that. But over the years, India has made a tremendous development in industrial area also. So Russians are buying a lot of industrial equipments from Europe. They don't look at India at all. But this is a question of awareness. This is our failure. We should go to Russia and make the awareness about our industrial development over the years, so that they turn to us, buy equipments from India. This is one area.
Okay.
I'm sure, one more area is diamond. Russia holds nearly 25% of world reserves of diamond, and we have the largest diamond cutting industry in the world. So we are perfect match for each other. But the Russian diamonds come to India through Europe, through Austria, Belgium, Israel. So if there is some kind of direct tie-up between the two countries, I'm sure they should raise our trade turnover at least by $5 to $6 billion in a year.
Okay.
Then, I think joint sector should be reinvested in India. That would provide some kind of impetus to our trade and economic relations. And investment, joint mutual investments are in a very pathetic condition. So the Russian investments in our country, in India, is almost $5 billion. But our investments in Russia is not much also, around that, $5 billion, and that too only in the energy sector. And the Russian investment in our country has been in telecommunications. But given the speed of the economic development in both our countries, the modernization programs that we are pursuing, I think there is a lot of scope for joint investments. But the problem is, India's economy is controlled by the private sector, 80%.
Right.
So is the case in Russia. 75% of the economy is controlled by the private sector. But the private sectors of both countries have not started looking at each other at all. So we have started some small beginnings, like bringing the private players to some kind of forum, Indo-Russian joint forum, but that is also not taking place. So, and consumer goods, a lot of consumer goods, even tea comes to, Indian tea comes to Russia through Europe, through Poland. So, these things should be looked after, so that the Russians change their view about the economic potential of India. And India should look at the Russian market. It is 140 million population. More than that, they have a customs union consisting of 3 countries, Kazakhstan, Belarus. So together 3 countries have 175 million population. Of the customs union, if it expands, it would have a population of 230 million people. So this is a huge market. And the advantage of this is, suppose the cost of living is less in Minsk and Kazakhstan. So you go and open your office in Kazakhstan, your cost of running your office would be much less than in Russia. You won't have to come to Russia, to Moscow. Open your office in cooperation, so that we tap the potential of Russian market and Russians tap the potential of Indian market. And I'm sure this should provide a big impetus to our trade and investment in coming years. And first thing, the private players should look at each other. The Europeans, they don't look at India, because they think, India is a country where cows still walk on the streets, country of snake charmers, fairy tale. So the industrial potential of India is not known to the Russian private players at all. They look at Europe. Of course, there is another psychological reason. They have their money in Europe. Europe is nearby. They go there for holidaying, they send their children for studies. So they look at Europe, they don't look at us. The political elite of Russia looks towards us. But the business elite doesn't look towards us. So in the case with Indian elite also, how many big players of Indian private sector look at Russia? So we have to bring the private players of both the countries together, and that would provide a kind of boost to our trade and investment in coming years.
Okay, but Ms. Roy Chaudhary, why is this perception about India, and why aren't the private sectors of the two sides collaborating?
Well, I think there's, it's primarily been a failure, actually, I would say, on both sides, for the simple reason that if for 60 years you've had this extremely close political relationship, how is it that the economic players were not looking at each other? You've just very recently had this CEOs forum that has taken off, I think during the G20 summit. They participated, and it sort of started off maybe some inklings of some kind of fast-moving consumer goods are now being touted from India into Russia. But it has, you know, the Soviet era generated the kind of industry that was not, that didn't really lend itself to easy trade. It was really don't see anything having taken off, defense and energy. Where has there been the actual trade happening, you know, as trade should be happening and thriving? That's not really taking place between these two major countries.
Commodore Bhaskar, why do you think that trade has not picked up between the two countries, although there are so many avenues of cooperation, so many avenues of investments for Russia in India, and vice versa for us as well?
You know, I just want to say in defense of the private sector on both sides that private sector anywhere, you know, operates on the principle of a degree of profit that is assured within what you might say is a larger legitimate kind of framework. And I think in fairness to both Russia after the end of the Cold War and to India's private sector, it's of recent origin, meaning the private sector in Russia comes into being only after Russia becomes Russia, you know, the post-Yeltsin years, two decades, 20 years. We in India are aware that many of our successes in the corporate sector have come about after the Narasimha Rao liberalization, again 20 odd years. And I think logically any private sector player would go to a direction or a domain where there are some returns that are assured. So the Indian private sector found its own niches where it had competence, whether it was in information technology or now in pharma, and they found outlets. Russia clearly is a market that needs to be looked at in a very focused way by India, because I think as the screen pointed out, the trade is now roughly $11 billion.
Right.
I mean, look at China, 66, look at the European Union, look at the United States. These are areas where we have very robust and well-established trade patterns. So I think we in India, this is my reading, have not strategized adequately, and the state has not enabled the openings for the Indian private sector, because much of Indian private sector effort, as we know all too well, is often stymied by regulatory practices. And to flag pharma since it came up, saying why we're not doing so well on pharma. I believe that the government of India has not again encouraged Indian pharmaceutical majors to present some kind of a collective option to the Russians. Whereas there's a lot of individual effort, and unlike the Europeans who enter many markets under the banner of the EU, so there are some collective kind of positions. I think, this is my reading, I'm a security analyst, but I still believe that we should be looking at pharma in a more strategic manner.
I mean, right from the time of the Northern Alliance, when the Taliban was moved away, India and Russia have collaborated to try and make Afghanistan an area that is free from the Taliban-like various you know, insurgent terrorist kind of groups. So the red lines that both Russia and India share are the same. Within, you know, they have to, whoever comes into power has to accept the Afghan constitution, they have to owe allegiance there, and obviously no terrorism or no use of violence to, you know, expand your needs. Now, given when interests converge, we are not terribly happy with what Pakistan is doing in that country or trying to do. So the roping in China into this particular dialogue gives you much greater leverage and much more leeway to actually do something and be a major presence in Afghanistan post 2014 when the American troops brought out.
Well, we've reached the end of the program. A quick word from you, Professor Mohanty, on these areas of convergence when it comes to terrorism or fighting religious extremism, particularly in Afghanistan.
Actually, we have a joint committee between the two countries on Afghanistan and on terrorism. But having said that, I must say I think the joint working groups are not working very effectively. And right now, India, I think one of the most popular country in Afghanistan. And Russia has a lot of stakes there. In spite of the 10 years of occupation, aggression, whatever, Russia is also popular. If you really analyze the elite of the country, it is still very popular there. And as one of the panelists said, we had Northern Alliance. So in the post 2014 scenario, there should be some kind of regional approach. And in this regional approach, definitely India, Russia can play a very significant role. Iran should be brought in, China should be brought in. So we should have some.
I'll give you the last word, Commander Bhaskar. You're the strategic analyst here.
I think the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's visit is a very, very valuable opportunity for India to engage with Russia on a series of both global and regional issues. Syria, Afghanistan, Iran also, I think, are just illustrative. But there are other issues, and I think this is going to be a very significant visit for India.
All right, on that note, it's time for me to wrap up the discussion here. I'd like to thank all my guests for coming to the studio.